And welcome to another edition of DC Beat on TI Now. As always, we'd like to get the current state of play in the policy sector with Danielle Coffey. She's the Vice President and General Counsel of Government Affairs at the Telecommunications Industry Association. And Danielle, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. I'm not sure if we had a chance to speak already this year. I know you were busy with TIA Spring Policy Summit. Before we start today talking about a number of issues that are important to the association and the industry, tell me about the Spring Policy Summit.
It was great. It was a really good summit. We had it in Cambridge, as usual, on the Eastern Shore in Chesapeake. This year was particularly interesting and not controversial, but there was a lot of things teed up during that time of year. We had Larry Strickling, Administrator Strickling of NTA, come out and receive our Spirit of Innovation Award. We had Commissioner Mike O'Reilly from the FCC, FTC Commissioner Maureen Olhausen. I don't want to leave out anybody, so I'll just say that we had a great group of people from the FCC, Congress, Congresswoman Donna Edwards, among other people who made the event a success, and we had more people than we've had in years past. So I'd absolutely say that we were very happy with how it turned out this year. Thanks for asking.
Sure, Danielle, of course, as I mentioned, there's a number of issues in the policy sector and in the telecom sector that it's important for us to discuss today. One of those is net neutrality, also the reclassification of broadband or potential reclassification, spectrum auctions, licensed versus unlicensed, and we're also going to talk briefly about bidding caps for spectrum.
Great.
Let's start with net neutrality. What is the current state of play, and what's the current conflict with net neutrality?
Very good question. It's one of the hottest items right now because people, it's been long debated over many years. In fact, I think it's now been a decade in which commissioners, the FCC, Congress, the White House even have weighed in on this issue that impacts consumers as well as our industry. It has to do with briefly, it has to do with the transmission of information over the networks, the ISPs, internet service providers, management of that traffic, as well as connectivity of devices. It's progressed and it's evolved over time. So since 2003, when TIA originally proposed through the H2BC, High-Tech Broadband Coalition, the connectivity principles that had to do with connecting devices or access to information over the internet that we wanted to ensure and safeguard. We've been through several commissions that have recognized the importance of these fundamental principles, including and starting with Chairman Michael Powell, who adopted them as his connectivity principles, embraced them wholeheartedly, as well as following him, Chairman Martin of the FCC called them his Internet Policy Statement. It's been a question of enforceability. There's been a question of what is allowable under the statute within the FCC's current jurisdiction and authority, which is why Janikowski found himself with rules that were struck down by the courts, the DC Circuit Court. He then proposed his new set of rules that attempted to get around the legal issue, but they were struck down again. And so that's where we find ourselves now with Chairman Wheeler, the FCC, with rules that were not legally enforceable under their authority. And he's trying again to fulfill the President Obama's promise that he promised throughout the campaign to make sure that the ISPs aren't gatekeepers, but in a way that, that passes judicial scrutiny.
Danielle, let's go into a little more detail about this reclassification of broadband into a Title II service from the current Title I service.
Sure.
As an internet service as opposed to a phone service. I know you talked briefly about some former FCC chairmen about their creative tactics and to make that reclassification happen, starting with Julius Janikowski, even as far back as Powell, as you mentioned. But now with Chairman Wheeler, he has his own ideas about how to reclassify. What is that?
Good question. So it was called the third way that was attempted, and it was considered, and I should mention that it's actually still being considered, to reclassify broadband internet access as a telecommunications service. And that's because of our Telecommunications Act and the way that it's structured. It's structured into titles, and titles apply to the services that are being offered to the consumers. Title II is a telecommunications service. It's a common carrier service, and it comes with that bucket, telecommunications service, Title II bucket, comes with a set of rules. And those rules apply to a telecommunication service, which is defined as a two-way, transmit, receive, or originate, terminate information, and it's always applied to telephone. It comes with a set of rules that people would like to more or less see applied to internet access so that you can make sure that the people who provide this service, like they do with telecommunications telephone service, can't discriminate, can't block traffic, can't do several things which are not allowed under the bucket, the Title II bucket, that they would like to have treatment on the internet service. Internet service is currently classified as an information service with an ancillary jurisdiction, also under Section 706, a bunch of legal authority that the Commission believes that they have, and it has actually been upheld by the D.C. Circuit Court. The rules were struck down because the rules that belong in the Title II bucket don't apply to the Title I information services bucket, which is where the internet services are classified. So what the court said is you are in the right bucket and you're using the wrong set of rules. So what the Commission says and what they're saying and what they might be considering again is, okay, well, what we might have to do if we can't find another way to do it is throw them in that Title II bucket. Or alternatively, Wheeler looks to be right now applying a new set of rules, keep it in the Title I bucket, and apply a set of rules commercially reasonable. You can't charge, or you can't block or anything. You can't make agreements, or you can't block traffic that's not in a commercially unreasonable way. And it's applied to roaming and others, so it has precedent. We've seen these rules before. So there's several ways that the Commission can go. Right now, it's in a place where it has more teeth, where it's applying more enforcement. So if you do violate the rules, however they exist, there's more enforcement authority at the back end to be able to sanction you if you violate the rules. And that's where we are now.
It's interesting, you mentioned the term commercially reasonable, and to put that in context, there's of course a recent issue in case between Comcast and Netflix as far as giving carte blanche, if you will, to some content providers and not to others. But is there a misperception about net neutrality regarding that issue with Comcast and Netflix?
You touched upon probably one of the hottest questions right now, and hottest, I mean, I don't know if you want to touch it because it's so controversial how people have reacted to what you refer to, which has gotten a lot of attention, and it's the paid prioritization issue. And it's how you treat the traffic, whether it's from Netflix or whether it's from Google, whether it's from your own service, what it might be, whatever it might be, and how much you can get paid, and the agreement terms you can come. Some people would like to see no money paid, no money exchange hands, because information is supposed to free on a best efforts basis. We know that's currently not true because we have to manage traffic to a certain extent. But the contention right now is whether or not you can charge a fee for management and prioritization and preferred quality of service of those packets, and what happens to the other information. We believe and we hope for a situation in which there's so much broadband capacity and our broadband capabilities across our nation are so robust that this isn't an issue. I don't know if we'll get there in time, but that would be a nice place to be at. So for now, what we deal with is the paid prioritization issue for ensuring a quality of service for the consumer so that they can receive video on demand or what have you, to be distinguished from interconnection agreements. And that has to do with the facilities-based agreements where you interconnect with networks and you hand off the traffic. Whereas paid prioritization is how you treat the traffic once it's on your network and how you deliver it to the consumer.
So what is the Comcast Netflix conflict? Is it the interconnection deal or is it the paid prioritization issue?
It is absolutely both. The interconnection, because Netflix has facility-based operations and they own their own network facilities, they need access to the last mile that Comcast has access to the consumer. So you need to interconnect. So it has to do with interconnection agreements. And this is going to be implicated in a whole other issue, the Comcast-Time Warner merger. And if one company has too much market power, which Netflix maintains that they will. That's the interconnection. They also have concerns, Netflix has stated it has concerns over paid prioritization, which has to do with how much you're going to charge me as the content provider, Netflix, for prioritized traffic delivery to the consumer over your network. So Netflix is a good example of where you have both concerns.
You would think there would be a strong argument on both sides. One side being, if you're an Amazon and you use a lot of bandwidth as opposed to a mom and pop shop, you would think that the rates would be raised on that particular content provider, and there would be an issue there. Is that what we're talking about, or is that too wide of a spectrum?
Well, no, I mean, you're absolutely pointing out what people would argue is the problem with allowing for paid prioritization, because a lot of the innovations people would claim, which are, true to a certain extent, have been made possible by a free and open internet where there's no throttling or blocking traffic or so forth. Although it should be pointed out that no set of rules have been considered that would allow for blocking of traffic. Nobody would ever say that they would want to do that. To the extent that rules were put in place that don't allow for competition by people who can't necessarily afford to pay, that is the contention. But it's a lot is going to be up to the industry to be able to determine what they can do on their own. People have always committed to practices whereby they wouldn't, hinder the type of innovation you're talking about, the mom and pop shop. And again, going back to the fundamental point, if we had the capacity in our broadband networks to allow for everything to flourish, then that should be our goal. That should be the ultimate goal. And that might bring us to a conversation about ways in which to go about doing that, both on the wireline as well as the wireless side.
Of course, this all leads up to the overriding issue, and that's the allocation or assignment of available spectrum, which will be starting in 2015. That'll benefit the industry, and it'll have an effect on net neutrality, possibly the reclassification of broadband as whatever service, internet service or a phone service. We'll see how that pans out, and also have an effect on paid prioritization or interconnection deals or rates as well. What is the current state of play of the spectrum auctions?
So speaking of making broadband robust and increasing our capacity so that people can, demand is growing exponentially and we're in a shortfall. I mean, in the National Broadband Plan in 2010, they said that we're at a shortage of 500 megahertz. So roughly, on the higher end, we're hoping for 120 megahertz to come out of the broadcast spectrum that's supposed to be auctioned off according to the Commission by next year. Their first set of rules is supposed to come out on May 15th. And in those rules, what we expect to see is some of the service rules that would happen after the repacking would occur of the broadcast stations that would be made available, broadcast channels, and where they would go to and how. As well as the spectrum aggregation rules talking about, allowing for certain bidders and the tier 1 bidders and so forth to whether or not they would be able to bid on a particular swath of spectrum. So we'll see those rules, and we're going to weigh in. Obviously, we have a lot of comments and hopes that it'll get done in an expeditious way so that our customers can build out the networks and our members, who are the manufacturers and suppliers, can build out those networks to the benefit of ultimately the consumer.
Danielle, the discussion behind licensed spectrum versus unlicensed spectrum allocation or assignment during these 2015 spectrum auctions has grown over the past couple of years. What is the current state of play for the release of unlicensed spectrum?
Well, everybody sees the value of unlicensed spectrum. There's no doubt about that, or unlicensed services being used in any band, really. In this particular band, one of the benefits that we will have is the proceeds that will come from the licensed technologies and the purchase of those airwaves to be able to build those networks that provide fixed wireless technologies to consumers. Without going into the benefits of what that type of technology provides, and I think that we know what it provides because we all use phones, we all have access to information, whether in our homes or mobile, but using CMRS technology. But one of the things that, the fundamental things that comes from licensed technology and the bidders that are going to come to the table, those wireless carriers that are going to come to the table, is the money that they're going to be able to offer up and the finances that they're going to be offering, which is going to play a part into fulfilling the proceeds, how the distribution of the proceeds that was in the statute. Part of those proceeds are going to go towards the FirstNet, which is the nationwide public safety network that's being built out by FirstNet, and they're going through that process right now. That depends on the funding that's going to come from those licensed services. So that's something that means a lot to our industry, means a lot to our members, the manufacturers and suppliers of public safety equipment. So that's very important to TIA. Another thing that we need to remember is that from fixed wireless networks and the capacity that allows for things that are, hospitals, educational institutions, and so forth that rely upon, like I said, public safety networks that rely upon the capacity that's made available by these networks, by the, fixed wireless networks that are going to be built out as a result of this auction are something that, the societal benefits are huge there. Not to say that innovations on the other end can't be seen through unlicensed technologies, but that's why we advocate for the use of those wireless technologies and unlicensed devices in the 5 gigahertz band, for example. Wi-Fi offloading of traffic, for example, is going to be a huge benefit. So we see benefits of both, but really it's the proceeds, which is why that will come from the auction, which is why our position is to maximize licensed use of broadband.
I think the biggest argument against that would be not only the sector that provide unlicensed services or that need to leverage unlicensed spectrum to provide those services, but also the tier 2, tier 3 carriers that are worried that these big, the big dogs, the tier 1 carriers, Verizon, AT&T, and Sprint, and so forth, will, I guess, for lack of a better word, hog all of the available assigned spectrum. Mm-hmm. Isn't that a valid argument? And is there something in place to prevent that from happening as far as caps on bidding for that spectrum?
It's somewhat related to the question. You may not have thought so, but on the other side of both of these debates, the licensed debate as well as, and these are the two more controversial issues, as well as spectrum aggregation and bidding caps and so forth. First of all, just real quick on the bidding caps, is the statute is quite clear that you can't prevent someone from bidding. However, in that same provision, it also says that you need to promote competition, which brings me to my point, the corollary between these two issues, unlicensed and spectrum caps. The common theme on the other side of the debates, which is where it seems like the commission is going. So the theme against where they're going seems to be competition, and that the commission has the obligation to promote competition. And what allows for that, proponents say, is unlicensed technologies, because it allows for competition against traditional fixed wireless technologies. Wi-Fi penetration in neighborhoods using this beachfront spectrum to be able to have, better propagation characteristics. As well as the proponents for making sure that rural carriers can bid in the spectrum auction and not be shut out by the larger carriers. And we understand that, and we understand the tension there. And competition to us is incredibly important, which is why we've been trying to look at ways in which the rural carriers can bid. And we've been looking at the size of the blocks, making the size of the blocks smaller so that rural carriers have a better chance. In which case you're not precluding or preventing a carrier, a tier 1 carrier, from coming to the table, but it's better suited to the rural technologies and carriers who can come to the table. So that's what we're currently exploring, is ways to create competition, meet that need. It's very important. It's very important in our industry. For our members especially, so that you have the plethora of customers. I mean, it's really self-interested. We're self-interested in competition. However, balancing that with the need for the proceeds and the need for, what we know will bring consumers the capacity that they're looking for.
Danielle, it's to me it seems like a lot of the issues that you're dealing with right now, as far as net neutrality, the rate classification of broadband that we talked about, the spectrum auctions, that they have a direct impact on the consumer base, the consumers, and that's why they seem to be getting maybe more attention or more media attention, if you will.
Maybe.
How does that change your approach to these topics?
That's a really good question because it impacts our work with Congress, because Congress hears directly from the consumers. So you would expect them to react accordingly, and then we would hear from Congress, and it would be in the hearing schedules. It would be on the calendar. Bills would be introduced that are reflective of how consumers are being impacted, whether positively or negatively, whether they want this new service or they're being hindered by or harmed by this new service. However, there's less of a direct interaction when it comes to the agencies or the White House or the departments that we work with, the Department of Commerce, Department of State. It transitions there over time, and we've seen ourselves interacting much more with the FTC, not the FCC, so the Trade Commission as opposed to the Communications Commission, as well as NIST, who's doing the cyber framework. Typically just a standards organization, whereas the framework, the cyber framework that we've been dealing with that was actually just released in February, has nothing to do with typical standards. It's actually a voluntary framework, so the antithesis. And so who we interact with has been impacted at that level more over time, but definitely, I mean, I see it very clearly now that we have convergence that we've been talking about for so long has actually really, it's really made its way here completely and has impacted who we deal with and how we deal with them, for sure.
Danielle, one event, TIA's annual event that we haven't talked about yet is coming up on June 3rd, going through June 5th, called TIA's Network of the Future event. Yeah. How do all these, again, these issues that you're dealing with right now culminate into or to that date, June 3rd?
I think actually a little bit of that, the answer to that was in my last answer, which has to do with the way the network is changing, and that people are so close to the products and services and know so much more about the products and services that they are using on a day-to-day basis, and they know how it affects their lives, which is why we have a spectrum panel, a big data panel, big data that's being collected on consumers. We have cyber, CTO roundtable, and so forth. So everything we do and all of the events, including the one in Dallas, are reflective of the work that we're working on throughout the year, the issues that are being covered by lawmakers in Washington, D.C., what our members come to us that they ask us to cover because it's currently impacting them or they know it soon will. So it's reflective of that, and it's integrated into that, so that we know that we're addressing what people care about, and that we're addressing what's hot and what matters, and that we're listening to our members.
Danielle, thanks for the update in policy right here at TIA. I'll see you in Dallas in June, I guess.
Great, thank you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks again for watching TIA Now. If you haven't registered yet for TIA's annual conference in Dallas, as I mentioned, that's on June 3rd through 5th. You can go to TIA2014.org and click on Register Now. So long.